All right, gang, moving on to story number 2. I have to admit that if there's one thing that angers me more than a nonsensical post or piece from someone on the left, it's a nonsensical post or piece from someone who claims to be on the right. Which brings us to Robby Soave. I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly, who's the chief editor of Reason magazine, a fundamentalist libertarian publication, and Robby Soave is a fundamentalist libertarian. Now, before I go on, let me just make one thing very clear. I'm not a libertarian. I am a conservative. A lot of people today seem to think that libertarian, conservative, they're synonyms or that they're interchangeable. I noticed some people still call themselves conservatarians. That was a trend that started, 3-4 years ago, I think, when I first noticed it. They're not. Conservatism is not libertarianism. Libertarianism is not conservatism. In fact, the fathers of modern day conservatism and libertarianism, Russell Kirk and Frank Meyer, understood that very well. In fact, again, neat little story, Russell Kirk, when William F. Buckley first asked him to contribute articles to National Review, when National Review was about to be launched in the mid-50s, Kirk initially refused because he knew that Meyer was going to be contributing articles to National Review as well. And I forget exactly how Kirk put it, but he made it very clear that he was not going to have his name in the same publication that Frank Meyer was also having his name published, and Buckley had to work some of his charm on Kirk, and Kirk actually did write for National Review for a few years, I believe, left pretty quickly and founded his own publication, Modern Age. But it was because of these vast philosophical differences between conservatism and libertarianism, differences which Meyer acknowledged completely as well. He was honest enough to understand that. I think a lot of people gravitate to the name of libertarian or the banner of libertarianism. A lot of people today do because of the brand. It sounds badass. It sounds, yeah, I'm a libertarian, kind of a Hell's Angel rider with a heart of gold and just a burning, unflinching desire for freedom and wide open spaces, while conservative kind of sounds like the cliche is the, stuffy academic scholar with the glasses down on his nose, reading dusty old tombs and wondering what Cicero would say about something, which doesn't sound stuffy or stuck up or snooty or anything like that to me. It sounds fascinating, but I love Cicero too. But anyway, I think a lot of people gravitate to those names simply because of the brand, and they aren't fully aware, perhaps, of the deep philosophical differences between conservatism and libertarianism. But having said that, let's dive into this piece, which Robby Soave wrote and published on his publication, Reason magazine. Quote, 1619 Project author Nikole Hannah Jones denied tenure at UNC Chapel Hill. The surprising move raises concerns about academic freedom. And this is what I mean when I say that Robby Soave is a fundamentalist libertarian, which is going to be even clearer when I read a little bit of this story. So, quote, Nikole Hannah Jones is a New York Times reporter and lead author of the 1619 Project, an award-winning investigative effort that came under serious criticism. The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill recently selected her to be Knight Chair in Race and Investigative Journalism as well. But this appointment has come with controversy. It was expected that Hannah Jones would be granted a tenure-track position. Instead, she received a non-tenured 5-year appointment with an option for tenure once it expires. According to the Times, UNC Chapel Hill's Board of Trustees has some say over this outcome and may have been motivated to deny Hannah Jones tenure due to conservatives' objections to her work. The Board of Trustees is indirectly influenced by the state's Republican-controlled legislature. Hannah Jones has become something of a lightning rod. That is the understatement of the year. While the 1619 Project attracted considerable praise, even winning a Nobel Prize, many historians, and not just those on the political right, have objected to both the project's framing and certain claims that it makes. Hannah Jones has not always engaged these critics in good faith. That said, It's clear the faculty within the journalism department wished for this to be a tenured position, and that it's rare for the trustees to overrule the faculty's wishes in matters such as this. Hannah Jones is eminently qualified to teach race and journalism, and while all the details are not known, it's hard to escape the conclusion that she was punished for expressing a politically disfavored viewpoint, which of course means that quote-unquote academic freedom is gravely compromised. No. Robby has this completely wrong, okay? Because, I'm just going to say this, because he is blinded by his worship of some abstract, all-encompassing idea of freedom, where it's basically the idea of Wiccanism. Do as thou, if thou harms no one, do as thou wilt, which is an asinine commandment. You know, that's something for angsty, goth, rebellious teenagers to cling to, you know, right? They're supposed to sew that onto their heartstrings. And then when they actually mature and enter the real world, they're supposed to say, yeah, that was kind of stupid. Not just kind of stupid. That is stupid. And they're supposed to chuck that off and actually get serious about life. But these fundamentalist libertarians never actually go beyond that point. What is academic freedom? It's not gravely compromised by any of this. Again, let's just be very, very clear. This whole controversy, academic freedom is compromised because Nikole Hannah Jones wasn't automatically put on track for tenure. UNC Chapel Hill, the Board of Trustees basically said, no, she's going to have a 5-year position, which means at the end of every year, she will have an evaluation. And if she passes her evaluation, then, you know, she will be allowed to teach for another year. At the end of that 5-year period, then she can be put on track for tenure. But until that time, she has to have evaluations every year. Now, so in the first place, that means that UNC Chapel Hill didn't offer her this position and then didn't rescind it because, oh my gosh, you know, the Board of Trustees doesn't like it. It was controlled, of course, by the ominous Republican legislative in North Carolina. No, she still has the job. She's just not automatically put on a tenured position. And, excuse me, why should she automatically be put on a tenured position here? I don't know if she has any teaching experience at the quote-unquote academic level, any previous experience like that. But even if she had, this is a new school, a new position. So of course, you know, she should be given a sort of a trial period before just automatically be given tenure. It almost makes it think that simply because she was Nikole Hannah Jones, a Black woman who authored the 1619 Project, that was reason enough to just put her on the tenure track immediately. When that actually violates academic freedom, because you're saying, no, it's not about the nature of your work, the nature of your research, or anything like that. It's just, oh, you're this person? Well, you automatically get tenure then. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that academic freedom is not gravely compromised by her not automatically getting tenure. It's her getting the job in the first place. Again, Robby Soave admits, let me read this paragraph again to you, gang. While the 1619 Project attracted considerable praise, many historians, and not just those on the political right, have objected to both the project's framing and certain claims that it makes. Hannah Jones has not always engaged these critics in good faith. That is the understatement of the year. Because the 1619 Project, I made a whole video about this, by the by, which is a year and a half old, almost a year and a half old. It was published in August of 2019, right after the project came out. And that'll be linked at the end of this video so you can watch it for the first time or enjoy it again. The 1619 Project is nothing but a pack of lies, gang. I almost hate to say this, but the World Socialist website, okay, which is exactly what it says. It's a website founded by socialists. They are out and out socialists. They did more to actually exposed the 1619 Project than anyone else. They conducted interviews with eminent historians like Gordon S. Wood, who actually said, this isn't right. This isn't right. And they recorded this and blessed them for doing this. Okay? This is part of what the 1619 Project did. Okay? And this is, again, on the World Socialist website. They recorded this for posterity. When it was first published in August of 2019, the inaugural essay in the 1619 Project, which was written by Jones herself, said this, quote, "The 1619 Project is a major initiative from the New York Times observing the 400th anniversary of the beginning of American slavery. It aims to reframe the country's history, understanding 1619 as our true founding, and placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of the story we tell ourselves about who we are." Now, the revised text, September of 2020, the revised text now says this. The 1619 Project is an ongoing initiative from the New York Times Magazine that began in August 2019, the 400th anniversary of the beginning of American slavery. It aims to reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of our national heritage, of our national narrative. They got rid of the part that says 1619 is our true founding. They got rid of that part because that was such an outrageous lie that even the New York Times couldn't get rid of it. They couldn't cover it. Couldn't even cover it. They couldn't even cover that. That was a little too bold even for the Times. It's like Carmen Falcone says of Batman Begins. Never underestimate Gotham. Well, yeah, the New York Times at least a little bit underestimated that. That was too big of a lie even for the Times. That happened again. As a matter of fact, Jones's inaugural essay was revised again. Because towards the end of it, she actually claimed that slavery, the preservation of slavery, was the only reason why the colonists eventually rebelled against Britain and declared their independence in 1776. Now, if you try to find that, it's not there. It just says, well, slavery was one of the primary reasons that led to the revolution actually being declared and fought. So, Nikole Hannah Jones makes two outrageous lies in her inaugural essay. We're not even talking about the rest of the project. We're just talking about Jones. And then, instead of fessing up, instead of actually saying, oh, that was wrong, oh, sorry about that, the New York Times instead subtly goes back in and changes the wording so that now, in this new Orwellian world that we live in, it's always said that. It's never said, the project never said that 1619 was our true founding. Nikole Hannah Jones never said that slavery was the only reason why the revolution was fought. That never, ever happened. And the people like at the World Socialist website, again, hadn't recorded that for posterity, that would now be the narrative. Because there would be absolutely no evidence that the original published versions of that essay had ever even existed. That's Nikole Hannah Jones. And just to go in a little deeper with that, 1619 isn't even, the beginning of American slavery, because all those slaves who came to Virginia in 1619, they weren't slaves. They were indentured servants. Now, I'm not saying that indentured servitude was just a walk in the park. It was just a picnic. It wasn't. But the difference between indentured servitude and slavery? Indentured servants weren't property. They weren't legally considered, weren't legally looked upon as property. Indentured servants were actually still people, and at the end of 7 years, they were given their freedom. That's why in 1861, when the American Civil War is about to happen, there were historians estimate that there were approximately 4 million slaves in the South, but there were also 250,000 freedmen in the South. That means black men and black women who were free. Some of whom, many of whom actually, owned slaves themselves. The biggest slave owner in Charleston, South Carolina in 1860 was actually a black man. Okay? And this is why those 250,000 freed men and women, those freed black men, freed black women, they were descendants of those indentured servants who had come in 1619. And what Nikole Hannah Jones also, I have to mention this, gang, in her project, never once mentions that, in 1669, I believe it was 1669, something happens, and the laws, the South gets rid of indentured servitude. They get rid of indentured servitude, and this is where you actually start seeing chattel slavery come into being. But then, what she doesn't mention again, is that leading up to the American Revolution, leading up to it, more and more people in the South actually are emancipating their slaves, either at their death or while they're still alive. She doesn't mention that it's after the American Revolution that states like Massachusetts and Rhode Island and New York and was it Delaware or Connecticut, I believe. That's when those states outlaw slavery altogether. This is when the South, people are just freeing their slaves right and left because they understand that slavery contradicts the principles of the American Revolution. Isn't mentioned at all. Isn't mentioned at all by Nikole Hannah Jones. She simply lies. She simplifies history criminally in order to buttress a narrative and a new mythology that benefits her and her ideology. That's what she does. She's not a journalist and she's not a historian. She's a propagandist. And yet, for some reason, people like Robby Soave think that her not automatically getting tenure is akin to a blow to academic freedom because it was politically calculated. Guess what? Nikole Hannah Jones has no business being in any sort of classroom. She has no business being in any newspaper room because she is a proven liar. She's a proven liar. And this is the really dangerous part. And this is the part that really, really just pulls my goat, gang. I'm sorry if I'm getting a little heated, but this stuff is near and dear to my heart. My background in history is kicking in now. When you fully admit that Nikole Hannah Jones has not engaged her critics honestly, and when you admit that she has, lied in her writings, but then you say that she still deserves tenure, she still deserves all this because of academic freedom, then academic freedom is worthless. If academic freedom means that truth and lies are on the same level, then you don't have academic freedom because the lies will crush and overcome the truth. Remember the old cliche that a lie can be halfway around the world in the time that it takes the truth to pull on its pants? There you have it, especially since he fully admits that she doesn't have a clean record in engaging her critics honestly. So you can't even say that academic freedom would be happening because she's not going to be actually engaging in the arena of ideas with other historians who want to quiz her on the 1619 project and say, well, I don't think you got this right. Well, what about this? Well, what about this? Because she'll just shut them down. Because questioning the 1619 project in the eyes of Nikole Hannah Jones and the rest of her comrades is simply further proof of why the project needs to be taught, even at the grade school level, which is actually being implemented across the country, such as in Buffalo and Chicago, because questioning the 1619 project is now just further proof of white nationalism, white supremacy, and white fragility. That is what is happening. You accept that, you get rid of academic freedom. And this also then points out the real problem with these fundamentalist libertarians like Robby Soave. His idea of freedom is so shallow and at the same time so absolute that truth and lies must be treated the exact same way. Well, if you do that, then you don't have freedom. Because a society that accepts lies on the same level as the truth, simply because, well, freedom, isn't going to have freedom. It's not going to have justice. And that means it's not even going to be a society for very long. Because a society that knowingly accepts lies, they never work. They always die and wither on the ground because they have broken away from reality. And I'm just going to say it. Robby Soave should be absolutely ashamed for having even written that essay. Should be absolutely ashamed for tweeting it. I saw this actually yesterday on Twitter. And all those 1,000+ people who liked his asinine tweet should be ashamed as well. Because they are just as much an enemy as anyone on the left. That is story number 2.